Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Security Space podcast. Today it is a new one for the podcast. It is a guest that I've not had the pleasure of speaking to before, or the type of guest I should say. It is a first for the Security Space podcast, and it is a cybersecurity lawyer. So what we were discussing today is all about the CMA reforms, civil liability, and really where sort of the hidden threats are around sort of security research. Appreciate it's a bit of a mouthful, that one, but it will make sense in the next few minutes as Rich guides us through a little bit of what he tackles on the day to day. But yeah, I suppose before we get into it, Rich, are you supposed to? Are you okay with giving the audience a little bit of a background to yourself, if that's okay?
Sure. My name's Richard Hanstock, and I'm a barrister by trade. I began, like presumably many of your listeners, building computers in my bedroom as a teenager. Lapsed from that, went into law, started in crime, and ended up doing local government and central government work. Manchester Arena happened, and it caused me to reflect on my life and what was important. And long story short, I ended up working for the government in a cybersecurity legal role. That was fabulous and fascinating. I felt I'd found my people in the community that listened to this podcast, really. And for the last couple of years, I've been on my own. I left government 2 years ago, and I'm now freelancing as a fractional lawyer to cybersecurity companies.
Okay. Well, before we do get into it, I just wanted to unpick that a little bit more. So obviously, Manchester Arena attack. What happened inside you where you're like, I need to do something about that, and I'm going to change the course of my career because of that? That's quite an impactful thing to happen.
I mean, not least for those who were directly affected.
Yes.
I don't mean to detract from their experience at all, but I think it created a national moment that I felt palpably that Christmas 17.
Is that when it was? 2017, was it?
17 to 18, I think.
God.
Where the Queen's speech that year in that Christmas. Well, obviously the attack wasn't at Christmas, but they were talking about it at Christmas. I always remember the Queen's speech where she presented the attack as terrorism as an attack on the sanctity of home. And I think that really resonated when, you're at home in the sort of throes of Christmas and kind of thinking about all the families that have had their lives decimated by what had happened and changed forever. And I guess that caused me to think about trying to be part of a bigger problem, if that makes sense. So the solution to a bigger problem.
Yeah, even when you come into Piccadilly, I don't know what train station you get into when you go to Manchester, but there's still sort of like just a section of Piccadilly Station that is still remembering it, and that's why it took me by surprise. I was like, God, has that been there already for what is 9 years? Yeah, and like let's say I'm from the northwest. I'm from Blackburn, so really really close to Manchester, and it doesn't take. Everybody knows somebody who knew somebody that was either at the event or they had a family member who was around the event. Even when I met my missus shortly after, her friend's sister was at the event. Luckily, they were safe. But like you say, it's just when you say it was like a terrorism attack on the home, it's like you say that's how close it was to us. So it's like, yes, we see in Geopol all the atrocities that happen around the globe, but as with anything in life, it's all about relevance, and when it starts to hit a little bit closer to home, that's when it starts to ring a little bit truer, and that's when you're like, oh, yeah, this isn't just something in the news. This is actually happening. So, really interesting that it had that profound effect on you. And so, tell me a little bit about obviously today. Then you've left the government role, you've set up by yourself. What is it that you're actually doing then, Rich?
Well, one of the things that really drives me is trying to help people who are doing good faith security research to navigate what is really quite a complex legal environment in which they operate. And I think it's one of those things that is widely known, but people do it anyway because it's the right thing to do, and we need secure software, and we don't get secure software unless people know how to pull it apart. And as a lawyer, I struggle with the idea that something that is so socially important is something that is you can't really do without embracing some kind of legal risk. Now, this is a debate that's going on at the moment around the Computer Misuse Act, and it's a bit of a trope to say that, it was written in the 80s when, a tiny fraction of people were online, and the impact of the computer on society and on our lives has transformed massively over the last sort of 35 years since it was enacted. And it's great the government is now talking about putting a public interest defence to the offence of unauthorised access to computer systems.
Yeah.
My concern is that it's the civil liabilities that underpin that and kind of surround that core that really can have a stifling effect on research.
Yeah.
And we're seeing some nations like Belgium and the Netherlands, they're doing a pretty good job of creating like a safe harbour for research.
Yes.
The UK conversation is a bit further behind. We're talking about this defence to the criminal liability, which is great. My fear is that when that hopefully is passed and that is then seen as an end point. Like, to my mind, that's the start of a conversation. And you asked me what I do. I help security researchers to navigate that residual risk that isn't going to be dealt with by this reform.
Okay, interesting. And I suppose I'm going to take it one step back to go 2 steps forward. And these security researchers, they are the ones, like, as with, well, let me take it outside of security for a second. Even just as a human race, we need to challenge in order to move forward. Otherwise, we'll just be stood still. Security researchers are extremely important to the industry because, like you say, they are testing things, they are breaking things, and we are learning from it. Now, what I said there, the breaking things, is where I assume your role comes in, and it's where the fight happens, and it's where people don't like anything breaking. Just ask my 4-year-old. Even though he's the one that also does the breaking. But essentially, it's like very much in big tech, they don't like to be challenged, and they've got to this mountain where it's like anybody trying to break our products, the Google, the Amazons, the Apples, they will hurt you because of it if you are trying to break said product, to the point of they could put businesses out, competitors out, because you are messing with their product per se. Have I got that angle right? Do you disagree? Is there more to it? Basically, big tech lawyers, through whether it's right or wrong, have the gravitas and the financial backing of these behemoths to win a legal case.
I think I definitely agree that there is an imbalance of power, I think, as between your typical pen testing shop or your academic researcher or just private individuals, a hobbyist trying to maybe participate in a bug bounty or something like that. The resources that they have available to them, even if they're operating in the course of usually a small business, right? Let's be honest, there's some big players out there, of course, but generally speaking, we're talking about small enterprises versus your typical software vendor, which is likely to have the resources that could far outstrip that of your typical researcher. And I think because of that imbalance of resource, we need to be really careful to make sure that the legal framework doesn't necessarily try to level the playing field entirely, but at least doesn't create opportunity or too much opportunity for a software vendor of any size that might be motivated naturally, commercially, to keep vulnerability quiet. So, I mean, it makes sense that, as you say, nobody likes things being broken. If it turns out that you've been peddling a software with a critical vulnerability in it, there is a natural commercial pressure quietly to patch and just let things lie. I'm sure we'd be preaching to the converted in terms of the listeners of this podcast to say that, well, in my view, there is a very strong public interest in there being public disclosure of vulnerabilities of that nature. And as a consequence, there is a risk that unless you have a vendor who is committed to that, to the principle of responsible disclosure, then there's a possibility that even the threat of legal action, whether or not it's meritorious, could drive the fruits of that research underground and create kind of a negative externality around that. That's what I worry about.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. And I'm just a little bit curious in the sense of the view of legality in the sort of cybersecurity sector, in the sense of digital and physical. And what I mean by that is, in the physical world, someone robs your house. You immediately on the phone to police, and you're like, okay, my house has been robbed. This is what I believe the suspect is. If you have that information, you got cameras set up, and it's immediately a threat, and it's looked into. With cybersecurity crimes, with digital crimes, they aren't necessarily viewed in the same perspective. And I don't know if it's because you can't see it, you can't touch it, and therefore it's not sort of a real threat. But why do you think that it is perceived? Yes, I'm not saying that it's black and white and that people haven't been imprisoned for committing sort of effects. Like you say, there's a lot of what you're saying there. I'm connected with quite a few sort of reformed hackers who were like in their early days, like you say, look at the M&S, the JLR breaches. It's kids that have been doing this, and then they'll serve the prison sentence. They'll come out and they'll be like reformed. A lot of the times they get recruited for these, even sometimes for government, because the work that they've done proves is like, oh wow, you are skilled in what it is, and therefore they've been reformed. But I've went too far there a little bit, Rich. I'm going to bring it back in the sense of like, why is crime not sort of seen the same in the digital setting as it is to the physical setting?
I think it's a fascinating question, and it reminds me of some foundational literature that I read as a sort of late teenager by a lady called Sherry Turkle, who is she's an MIT kind of technical psychologist, I guess. Please forgive me if she's listening. That's probably not a very fair explanation of what she's doing, but she wrote a series of books. The one that really resonated with me was one called Alone Together, and another one from 1995, I think, called Life on the Screen, where she noticed that what was happening as computing, the internet, the web was becoming much more embedded in our lives,
Yep.
that it was having an impact on the way that we as human beings relate to one another.
Yep.
And essentially one of the things that she observed was that as people were maybe in multiple internet relay chat rooms,
Yep.
as was the vogue at the time, Slack for the younger listeners these days, right?
Yep.
That's kind of they were effectively context switching and potentially having multiple different identities
Yes.
online. And she was very interested in what does that mean for kind of fracturing our sense of self.
Yes.
Bringing that back to your question about crime, I think that the more I agree with you that there's a sense that, if something's happening in cyberspace, whatever that is,
Yeah.
that it's somehow less urgent or less pressing than something that is threatening our physical safety. I think that's fair. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's more impactful, but the more that we trust technology, the more that technology pervades our lives,
Yes.
the greater the potential harm that cyber crime can have on us.
Yes.
And I think what you're describing there, if it's right that there's a perception that these crimes are treated differently, my sense is that there's a narrowing gap between how urgent we might feel about being intruded upon. So let's say someone hacks into your phone and steals all your private photos.
Yeah.
That might, for some people, feel more intrusive or more impactful than a burglar coming in whilst you're out on holiday and stealing some jewellery. That's not to minimise at all either crime or but in essence, I think so. Our views of what matters in terms of cyber is changing.
Yep. Okay. So I just wanted to come back a little bit to what you mentioned earlier on in the podcast around the Computer Misuse Act. Like you say, it came out in the 80s. It's very much a legacy policy now, and as such, the landscape has completely changed, and therefore, why is that not being involved with it? And yes, it's good that they are looking into it and they are changing it, but do you think my question to you, Rich, is it papering over the cracks? What part of the Act is actually being reformed? Is it actually protecting the little man, shall we say? And is it actually is it being improved in the right way? What's your actual view on these updates to the CMA?
I think, as I say, it's the beginning of a conversation. That's what I hope this is, not the end of one. Essentially, the big change for me is the introduction of a public interest offence to the offence of unauthorised access. So the idea is, if you're a hacker and you hack into a system and you shouldn't be there, technically you may very well, or obviously you may very well have committed the offence of gaining unauthorised access to a computer system. But if you're doing that for good faith research, query what does good faith research mean, then you shouldn't be prosecuted, I think, because there's a countervailing public interest. Now, there are lots of other protections that might kick in to say, well, actually, it has to be in the public interest for a prosecution to proceed, but it's a vulnerable place for a researcher to be. Now, I think there is, because of the point that we made earlier about how vulnerable people, I think, can feel online or should feel, the more that we become dependent on technology, the more concerned people are about anything that might water down the current legal protections for cybersecurity. Right? So I understand that it's a difficult and sensitive issue, the idea of creating this kind of carve-out for something that is a bit nebulous, like what is good faith research? Does this mean that we're suddenly opening the door to bad actors to come in and claim that they're acting for good faith, but actually really up to no good, and therefore will be materially less secure? I don't see that as being the right approach to this problem, because I think the more mature, modern view of the problem is to recognise the value that security research has on our collective sense of security. And so it's really important that we enable that to happen, because frankly, bad actors probably aren't going, oh, well, I won't do that because it's the Computer Misuse Act. Oh, I might potentially get, if someone can find me through all my layers of infrastructure and methodology and tradecraft, blah, 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 maybe I might go to prison for a bit. I think really their motivation is far stronger than that, is my hypothesis. I don't really have any data for that. The people who are concerned about compliance with the law are those who are setting out to do the right thing. And so the risk of an overbroad prohibition chilling that research is the thing that I think is the bigger social problem, as computers are a bit more important in our lives.
Do you think that it might be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to things like geopolitics, or China's hacking us, or Russia's doing this, or whatever it might be? You can insert any sort of country into that domain. Everyone's sort of hacking one another, to be honest with you. So, do you think it is a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction? And do you think it's also because cyber is well and truly entrenched in the boardrooms now? It's not like, oh, we need to get cyber into the boardrooms. I believe it is in the boardrooms, and because of that, it's push and pull. It's like with that additional publicity that cyber gets, it's also the pullback. Like, there's a lot of fearmongering, and as such, that has got to the boardrooms that come into policymaking, and as such, we are creating our own handcuffs. Is that what you're sort of saying there about, like, we're kind of setting the good guys up for a bit of a fall here by restricting their capabilities? What's your thoughts on that, Rich?
I think the more permissive the legal regime we have for security research, the more likely it is that you'll get good research done. And I think importantly, the more likely it is that the insurance industry, for example, will feel able to support good faith research by providing competitive products. And we're having the discussion at the moment around cyber insurance, I think, is really focused on organisations that have been breached, that have suffered a cyber attack. And what does adequate cover look like? Have they got too many exclusions? Is it just too expensive to be viable? What's the future of cyber insurance from a breach response perspective? What I think the market also needs, and these legal reforms I hope will pave the way for, is insurers to come to say, right, if you're a penetration testing shop, you're doing good faith vulnerability research, because we recognise that you can do that compliantly with the law, we will insure you and the risk that you might take when you go and butt up against the interests of an entrenched, well-resourced software vendor, for example, and we will back you because we recognise that what you're doing is valuable. You pay a premium that you can afford and is accessible to a company of your scale, and we've got people who can underwrite that risk for you. I think that would be a really transformative moment for security research in this country.
I think we might. Well, I think we're on the path for that, but I just feel like we've got a bit to go before we're there. Do you agree? In the sense of, cyber insurance is it's just it's like I actually had a podcast earlier on today with Isabel Finn from Canopius Group, and they're an insurance provider, and we used the analogy of cyber insurance. We used a car, for example, nice and basic, that your security tools are like the brake pads of the car, but the car insurance is the insurance. So you need both to be fully safe, to be honest with you, because yes, the brake pads are there, but you might still get in a crash, and therefore what do you need? You need insurance. So therefore it's like another conversation, as I mentioned about a couple of minutes ago. Cyber is in the boardrooms now. It is. Cool. So we're now in front and we're having conversations. Money is being invested in security, but it is being invested in teams. It's being invested in tech stacks. Insurance is that next layer in terms of, like, you look at insurance, you look at DFIR. It's that, okay, if we do get hit or / when, what safeties protocols do we have in there? What you mentioned there, Rich, if I've rightly understood it, is like you've got insurance, and then we've got the additional cost of, like you say, these legalities. So, do you agree? Do you think that, or do you think like, oh no, Nick, we're actually closer than that, or what's your sort of viewpoint on what I've said there?
I'm a professional pessimist, I think it's fair to say. So I think I share your view, Nick, that we're some way off the maturity that I would like to see in the market. But as I say, I hope that these reforms are the beginning of a conversation, national conversation, that sees a very clear safe harbour for legitimate security research that could then enable, I think, it will take the law of changing before the market then catches up, I think.
Yeah.
And there are some good models there in for example, I think Belgium and the Netherlands. But yeah, we collectively we need to be ahead of the curve, and the UK has an opportunity to be if its ambition is to be the best place to do security research, then what a fantastic boost that would be for the economy, right? But I'm not a policy guy.
So what type of organisations do you actually help then, Rich?
I'm privileged to be retained by a number of cybersecurity companies, those ranging from attack surface management through to penetration testing, through to those who produce commercial intrusion software, helping them with not just the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of how do you go about safely conducting and talking about, shouting about in some cases, legitimate research, but also how do you safely export your intrusion software? How do you go about ensuring that you are compliant when you're dealing with technology that is perhaps testing the edges of legal regimes that are not really designed for that? You see a lot of that in AI, for example, and in cryptography, testing the boundaries.
Yeah,
it's great fun. The things that you need a lawyer who has a technical understanding, or at least the ability to acquire one, of a product in order then to give competent advice.
Nice. And how's the market sort of responded to you more than anything? Have they been like, finally, we didn't know this had happened, or we're not ready for that yet? Like, how have you seen the response to your offerings?
I've been really encouraged, to be fair. Something that I thought Pwn Legal would be a side hustle that was an interesting adjunct to a kind of a more vanilla legal practice. It's resonated, I think, with a bigger gap than I had anticipated there being, or a perceived gap at least, where companies that I have the privilege of working with often say to me that they've got a retained lawyer. They always go to a particular law firm, but there's sometimes a sense that maybe what they're getting is kind of generic SaaS advice, or it's not. They don't quite understand the sector or the challenges that they're facing or the commercial objectives that they're trying to achieve. I'm not saying that I've got some sort of magic sauce there, but I think by bringing my background and the perspective that I can offer, clients value that, which is great. And I think there's definitely space for any geek lawyers who are listening to this. Let's talk, because there needs to be more of us, and there's definitely a gap there.
Why is there not more of you?
Maybe, who knows? Maybe there are loads of them, and I'm just ploughing my particular furrow. I've been talking recently with people in defence tech, where I think you see it's a similar setting, where people with a particular background who are perhaps ex-military or have some connection to defence. They're able to speak the language of their sector and are therefore attractive to be advising defence tech companies. And there's definitely overlap there.
Yeah.
The more aligned you are with mission, the more you understand and are genuinely curious about the technology, I think the better, more informed advice that you can give.
I apologise to the audience for bringing this up, but I always try not to bring AI up into a podcast, but I feel like it's relevant right now. I think when we first spoke, Rich, I'm sure we had this chat, but it was around sort of AI and security, and it sounds like when I was speaking to a lot of the vendor market 2-3 years ago, I was speaking to a lot of startup founders, and so many times they have to wait for the right time in the market for the market to be ready for their product. I'll give you an example. I was speaking to, I think my dad, when we were just having a coffee one time. Skype were perhaps a little bit too early in their market. Yes, they did all right, but Zoom then came in COVID time, Zoom and Teams, and they blew up, and they are the video conferencing. And it's kind of like Skype were a little bit early. Nobody uses it anymore. So what I say is, all these sort of security products, they need to wait for the right time in the market for it to be relevant. Obviously, where I'm bringing it round to is yourself. And do you think that AI security might be the match to the fuse of a lawyer like yourself in cybersecurity, a technical lawyer? Because not right now, but we're still designing the legislation, the frameworks, what is a crime, what is not a crime when it comes to the use of AI, and we're even implementing agentic AI, which could very well explore sort of legalities, and it could very well slow down the innovation in AI because they've gone a little bit too far with agentic AI. So in a roundabout way, do you think that AI and security might just be the fuse to the match to the fuse?
It could very well be. Lots of people are interested in AI because I think it's certainly large language models have captured the public imagination in much the same way that the computer did when the World Wide Web was switched on. And, and that capturing of imagination and the conversation around AI safety, I think, is then informing an increasingly well-informed debate, it seems to me, about what the legal frameworks ought to look like globally, in order to kind of try to get ahead of things like AGI. How on earth do we cope with some of the quite existential questions that AI adoption is leaving us with? The pace of innovation is just phenomenal. I think as a geek lawyer, it is awesome to see people engaging with these topics. It is genuinely very satisfying. For AI and security specifically, I'm finding that AI adoption is one of those examples of an edge case in testing what is already a difficult legal framework for security research because of the application of AI in security research. So if you're increasingly, pen testing shops, for example, increasingly using AI tools to automate what they previously would have done as a human being, I think some bug bounty programs sort of exclude the use of automated tooling at the moment. That's an interesting kind of safeguard around what is perceived to be a threat from AI to the scope of research, or the kind of judgment or the pace maybe that security research can proceed at. There are definitely overlaps there. I don't know what the answer is.
No. Well, I wasn't expecting the answer. Like I say, we haven't got a crystal ball. It'd be amazing if we did. But Rich, I've been an absolute sponge over the last half an hour. I've been an absolute student, and I'm really, really sort of curious as to, like you say, you were first for the podcast, and like you say, make that vertical your own. I believe that the market is now ready for it, and I wish you every success with obviously building Pawn Legal's brand. And if anybody has any questions or would like any information for Rich's services, I'll be sure to put his information down below. But once again, thank you very much for coming on the Security Space podcast.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Nick.